Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to Being Patient Brain Talks. I'm Deborah Kahn, founder of Being Patient. Well, for those of you who know me, you know I've become increasingly fascinated with this intersection of creativity and brain health. And we've seen it within our community, how the creative brain, even with a dementia diagnosis, can continue to flourish. So we thought we would unpack that a bit more today. And I'm so happy to have with us Gloria Aguirre. She is from UCSF. She is the creative she's the creative artistic director, creative minds artistic director, I should say, for a very unique program around brain health, equity, and creativity. Gloria, welcome.
Thank you so much, Deborah. I'm so excited to have this conversation with you and grateful for the invitation. It's a really exciting space that's opening up, and kind of we're seeing a lot of evidence and experiences come out. So I'm really looking forward to our conversation.
So, Gloria, let's just start with, what amazed me is when I first entered into the Alzheimer's space, I had heard so many people, doctors, scientists tell me an Alzheimer's brain can no longer learn. And I learned firsthand through our conversations with people, interviews, community, people who have been diagnosed, that that's not true at all. In fact, the creative side to your brain still can grow even with a dementia diagnosis. So tell me a little bit about your experience with that and what we know.
Wow, well, that's a big question. Thank you for it. I will preface this by saying I'm an artist and I work in the community. I'm not a clinician. So there are people who can speak to brain anatomy and the pathology of disease more specifically. But I think that what we have seen and what the research shows us really is that creativity can really serve as a form of hope, right? In the context that we don't right now have a cure for Alzheimer's, which is the most commonly known form of dementia, or other types of dementia. How do we harness the tools that we do have available to us? And in the brain research that clinicians like Dr. Bruce Miller and Dr. Sergio Lanata, who direct our programs at the UCSF Memory and Aging Center, have done and contributed to, we see that although there may be neurodegeneration or a loss of brain cells in a particular part of the brain, at the same time, there can be sort of a greater activation at other parts of the brain, right? And those parts of the brain have been found to be linked to creative activities and experiences like visual arts, like movement, like music. And so there are these very deep ties that I think speak to why we should continue to be hopeful in the face of a situation where we don't have a cure and there are actually few tools. And there is a growing population of people who are experiencing these brain changes, right? It's been that, I think, a source of hope, a way of being more curious about those changes in the brain and seeing really where do they manifest, and how can we, through behavioral changes and a greater awareness of what that looks like, plug into tools like art, like movement that can build resiliency, maybe even in the face of loss.
So it's interesting because most of us have seen what music can do. Like musical memories, especially with people who have played an instrument, don't get destroyed. I've tested this out in my own mom with Tony Bennett, who she used to love. And I put on "I Left My Heart" in San Francisco, and she can sing the words. She mouths the words. It comes back to her, my mom, in a later stage of dementia. And so there is an understanding with music. And I know a lot of research is going around this, like, why doesn't Alzheimer's destroy musical memories? But is it the same with all types of creativity, like art, for example? If you were a painter, can you paint until like a very late stage of dementia?
You know, what I would say, the research that I'm most familiar with in this space, I think that it's a developing field, and these are questions that we're still trying to answer. There's a great interest in this and has been an investment in not only curiosity, but an investment in the work from our center throughout its existence over the last 30 years or so, or basically. And I think that what we have seen, or what we know right now, is that their visual, if a painter, for instance, has experiencing dementia, what we see generally is a change in their style, or that's what I'm most familiar with, right? So we're talking about these deep memories of music and a connection that the individual may have to an art form, like a song. But then how does that deep connection change and progress alongside the progression of brain changes, right? And so in visual arts, I think that what we've most seen is changes stylistically. So if someone previously was someone who painted a lot of landscapes and used a lot of pastels, their style may become, like more aggressive or vibrant colors, or just have a very different aesthetic to it. And that seems to happen in parallel with changes that are happening in the brain and neurodegeneration. There tends to be, I've read about and had many conversations with clinicians about these bursts of creativity and sort of special periods that happen. And maybe we only really see them at this point or become more aware of them as a look back. And I think that kind of the work that we're trying to contribute to now is noticing those changes as they're happening and noticing how we can better support, positive outcomes along the progression, again, in the context of we don't have a real solution yet.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to share with you all, there are people who have talent, and then there are people who have a dementia diagnosis who didn't think they had artistic talent, but then it continues to flourish. And I'm going to share my screen because I want to show you, this is a woman who has become a friend of mine named Rebecca Chop. Rebecca was a 3-time university president, and she was diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's. She started to paint, and she didn't ever paint before. A friend of hers said, "Hey, join this painting class." And I just want to show you, these are some of her paintings that she's been doing. Her grandson, a portrait of her grandson behind her. I mean, it is truly amazing what she has been able to create and unleash without understanding that she had an artistic talent to paint. So, I mean, this is just the perfect example that you don't even need to have, you can have unrecognized talent, and a brain with a dementia diagnosis can flourish in creativity. And the power of that means we can change the message around having a diagnosis. And I think that's core to what you're actually doing. And I want to transition there and tell people about your program with the arts. How are arts and clinical research interacting at UCSF, through your program? Tell us a little bit, because I'm hoping what this is going to do is become an example to other people out there.
Oh, I hope so too. And I think that what we do can be replicated. And I hope that as we really start to contribute more to the literature around this, that'll be something that emerges from this work. We are an arts and health collective, I would say. So arts and health is this blending of artistic practices with approaches to healthcare and health systems. And the director of our program is a behavioral neurologist, Dr. Sergio Lanata. And then we have a group of artists, right, and other clinicians, neuropsychologists, other neurologists, fellows who come and have really multidisciplinary approaches. And in our work, what we do is through dance, through visual arts, through photography, find opportunities to open conversations around brain health and around aging in general, because so much of aging, right, has an effect on brain health, heart health, mouth health, right, like dental health. So many of these things contribute, diabetes, but we don't think of them as brain health. So how can we use this tool that is an art piece, that is a dance, that is a song, to open that conversation where we're talking about meaning making, right, in the context of aging, that we know becomes increasingly important. There's a lot of literature around how as we age, we're looking for more meaning in our lives, or trying to sort of contextualize what that is. What is the purpose? So how can we start there, have an experience together, and use that to talk about brain health and talk about how all of that contributes to caring for our brain health over the life course. I think that for me, one of the biggest sort of opportunities of this work is to do generational change, where we're having these conversations at an age, and we work mostly with older adults, but are trying to sort of slowly lower the age of engagement, I would say, to be more in the midlife. And I think of that in terms of generational change, really important in breaking some of these ivory towers around what it means to be an artist or have creative ability or participate in dance or music. And also be a bridge, sort of a translator between generations so that younger folks, right, children, youth, are learning these concepts about taking care of their health and also taking care of sort of their humanity, right, through creative avenues. And also sharing some of that information to older generations that may have other sort of concepts around what it means to be an artist, what it means to engage with the healthcare system, what it means to have a medical evaluation of their cognitive health, which can be a pretty scary thing to talk about or even approach.
Absolutely. And one of the things I probably should have mentioned, excuse me, earlier, is you deal a lot with health equity issues. Sorry, something just got in my throat. So, under that lens, a lot of these programs, I mean, we know about cultural stigma around the brain, right? It's in Latino populations, in African American populations, Asian, which was what I am half of. We know, especially for the older generation, talking about something going wrong with your brain is almost a cultural stigma. You don't, you hide it rather than talk about it. So to me, it makes a lot of sense to use art to enter that conversation. So in the cultural lens of like creating more health equity, tell me a little bit about that and the role that this program has played and what you've seen in terms of a result.
Okay. Thank you for the question. I think that maybe this would be best illustrated in an example. I can think of sort of a recent experience in the Creative Minds program and thinking about this loop, right, between sort of what's important to us, what that means in the context of healthcare, and how we can bridge that to have a conversation that is bringing those two things together. We partner with a community-based clinic in San Francisco that primarily serves Latino and immigrant populations, people who tend to live in vulnerable neighborhoods and circumstances of many challenges in the city. And at that clinic, over a 4-week period, we did a textile and painting project that starts out as a conversation around what foods are important to us, right? Thinking of the gustatory response even, and what memories are activated when I eat something that is familiar to me or tastes like my mom's pie or what have you, right? So a conversation about that, the meaning making and the sharing of cultures and the building of community between a group. Then thinking about how do we translate that to more abstract ideas of art, of symbolizing that through color, through shape, through a representation visually. As a third step, we bring in a doctor and have a conversation to explain what do those colors mean, why is that food important to us, and then transition and move to a space where we're talking about how food contributes to brain health and healthy cognitive aging, right? Through the lens of diabetes, through the lens of cardiovascular health, through the lens of many different aspects of physical health that contribute. And then sort of bringing that all back to a conversation of learning and about why it's important to contribute to science, why it's important to remain engaged in community activities, why it's important to remain engaged socially. Ultimately, what we see in our program and a big focus of what we're trying to do is to build and maintain social connection and avoid social isolation, right? We know that so much of that human connection is important in health outcomes and is increasingly demonstrated in the literature for brain health outcomes. So again, how can we use this cool tool that's kind of nebulous and sometimes scary, that is art, to break all of this and just have a better outcome?
I mean, it ticks all the boxes. It's amazing. Like the social engagement is so critical, to living well, and taking care of your brain. So talk to me a little bit about that, because we know that we need more diversity in research in order to solve the puzzle of Alzheimer's and other dementias for that matter. I mean, we don't have enough data currently in diverse populations in order to understand how the disease behaves in the context of different cultures and populations. So how does that translate when the program is a lot, and I really want to delve into this so that you can be a model for other people, because we do need to get more diverse communities into research to better find prevention and cure strategies and treatments. So tell us a little bit about that, like what have been some of the outcomes in terms of the program around brain health, the socialization aspect of it, which is wonderful, to really having a dialogue about research participation. Has it been hard to make that bridge?
I have to say that, again, not to just speak so much praise, but we're really lucky. I'm very lucky to work in an organization and in a center where our leaders are open to views about how these things can come about in a way that is natural and good and is not extractive from the community. And so when I hear words like diversifying research and how do these diseases sort of manifest in different cultures and ethnicities and races, sort of my like prickly hairs tend to stick up a little bit, and I get a little concerned because I don't think that we should be talking about dementia or any disease in the context specifically tying it so closely to race, right, or ethnicity, or these things that in science literature, and again, not as a clinician, but in what I've seen, being tied very closely to disease outcomes that are not really race-based, that I think are shown to be more circumstance-based, right? The lives that we lived, what is the lived experience of somebody who embodies this category that we talk about? And so when I say that and thinking about recruitment science and sort of diversifying research and contributing to science, I think that we need a broader understanding of how this happens in humans, right? How this happens in humans who have lived in a city versus lived in a very rural or nature-based location. How does this happen in humans who have greater access to education versus those who don't, or maybe engage with education later in life? When I came to San Francisco, having lived mostly in Miami, and Miami, Florida, that county is a majority minority county, meaning that it is majority Latino and Black or African American, and the minority are white or Caucasian, English speaking people, right? So I came to San Francisco and the UCSF Memory and Aging Center thinking that I knew a lot about community engagement with these communities. But when I arrived in San Francisco, I understood that there was sort of a different aspect of this work. You know, I never in Miami had to go out to the community and try to engage Latinos because we were all kind of just there. And on the flip side of that, what I've seen outside of Miami is much more segregation, right? And like who goes to clinic, who goes to university, who goes to this supermarket versus another. And so I think that we have a really big strength in that our center understands the importance of long-term investment, right? Of showing up without an ask, of showing up just to have a conversation, and that in and of itself being worth it. And beyond that, then seeing how that unfurls, and the beauty, and something that I hope that we'll be able to really unpack through Creative Minds, which our sort of tagline is that it's the San Francisco Community Arts for Brain Health Initiative, right? So all of this is in the effort to improve cognitive health outcomes through the life course. And my hope is that through that program and through collaborating with doctors and collaborating with scientists, which can be challenging, right? We speak different languages. Like, I think that we both have a really strong base of curiosity and creativity, but the challenge comes in how we talk about that sometimes, and how do we present that information, and where do we see value in science and experience, and in what is the evidence, right? So coming together to tell that story about how showing up matters, how about introducing scientific topics and focusing on education also matters, right? Just the art is not enough to get the job done. And then how do we see curiosity about brain health and access to care and making links happen naturally? And we have seen it. And the really cool thing that's happened, I think, or that's excited many of us, is that then we see that our community artists, our participants in the program, they themselves become advocates for the work, for the program, for research participation. I don't have to go out and say, we need Spanish speakers, or we need Latinos. Latinos is like a funky kind of word. I don't even really identify with that word. I've always used the word Hispanic. So all of these categories, I feel like we have to kind of try to move past them and just talk about why is it important that all of us are participating and engaging in science, and all of us are participating and engaging in arts and humanities.
Yeah, that is a really, really wonderful point you make. And instead of through the disparity lens, it's more like the contribution, right? How can I
Right.
be a contributor, right? And that makes so much sense. Everybody, would love to be a contributor. They don't want to feel like they don't have something. They want to feel like they can give something. So I get what you're saying, and beautifully said. Um, Tell us a little bit though about, okay, so the reason why being patient exists is because of that bad communication. I mean, I'm the daughter of a geneticist, so I know firsthand, it's really hard for scientists to talk to us lay people, right? It's like almost, words come in and you're like, what, huh, where am I? That's one of the reasons why we founded Being Patient, is to translate the science for people so that they can have a better foundation and better understanding. So how does that handover, because obviously you're engaging with populations of people and getting them engaged in art, they're having a good time, they're socializing, you're teaching them a little bit about why it's good, art is good, and socialization for the brain, and then the handover happens. Or are you still involved in terms of, if somebody is curious about research and wants to participate, how do you make that transfer?
I guess that is the space of a translator, right? And I've always kind of been in that space, translating, growing up in Miami and being, of Cuban descent, translating kind of between my family and everybody else, and both sides. So I find myself doing that here in San Francisco for language-based reasons too. But then disciplines, how do we make that transition? I think what is really special about the collaboration that exists between us as a collective at the Memory and Aging Center is our desire to serve in that role. I don't know that we always do it perfectly, right? And I think that one of the most impactful experiences that I had kind of right when I came to San Francisco was exactly this, was being in a clinical space, it was a research space, excuse me, but someone who was diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's came in for their annual evaluation with their care partner, who is his wife. And that year, the care partner brought their 12-year-old child,